Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. We're going to carry on talking about autonomic healing, spiritual formation, and we just want to give a bit of a disclaimer for this episode that this could be an interesting conversation. There's a few thoughts that we wanted to explore. So, I mean, I personally like those types of conversations where we're just going to open it up. So,
who knows?
We'll see where it goes. But stay with us, listeners, because I've got a feeling that this is going to be a great space to explore some of the things that we wanted to talk about, issues around identity. And the reason why we want to do that is because initially, when you started coming up with autonomic healing, spiritual formation, initially you actually called it...
Well, initially I was very conflicted.
Yes. So talk more about that. Yeah.
When I identified AHA and how to activate homeostasis in the body, a couple of years later, I wondered if there could be a cognitive homeostasis because we are body and mind. And the mind plays such a role in either a sense of contentment or particularly with the seemingly rational perceptions, people pleasing, perfectionism, etc., criticalness, blah, 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 that creates stress where it doesn't even exist because of the way we think when we are seemingly rational. And so that's where AHA problem solving came in, which was a cognitive homeostasis as an extension of and support for or correction of somatic homeostasis. A sense of homeostasis, things operating normally, optimally in the body, and then how things, by way of the brain, not the mind, can operate more optimally, normally, actually rationally in our consciousness and the way we're thinking. And that was AHA problem solving. Yeah. Because the brain was solving all these problems that the mind was coming up with. Problem solving, people pleasing, problem solving, perfectionism, problem solving, my way or the highway, and thinking, directing, and controlling, problem solving, taking on everybody else's issues as though they're your responsibility. These fundamental kind of distortions of thinking about self, others, and situations.
Yes.
Then a few years after that, which is now a few years ago, I began to wonder if, since we are body, mind, and spirit, we are human beings, if there could be an experience of homeostasis at a being or spirit level. We are body, mind, and spirit. Most people think in those terms. And we are. With spirit, it's breath, life, alive. It's a sense of being. I am. What we're also really talking about is a sense of being as identity.
Yeah.
I am, or for many people, the big question is, who am I?
Yeah.
An identity.
It's a massive question for human beings.
It's fundamental.
Who am I? And so in the beginning, you were actually torn whether to call it, spiritual formation. Yeah.
Identity formation or AHA spiritual formation.
But one of the reasons why there was that question as to which one it should be is because they are interlinked.
Yes.
Would you say?
Yes. And I opted for spiritual rather than identity because spirit was more fundamental, more, I don't even know quite the word to use for it. It's being.
Mm.
And spirit has that sense.
Yeah.
For me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So let's
and we use that word that
we
way.
do, yeah.
Boy, that person's really got spirit.
Yeah.
Or that person is very spiritual. Or it's getting at being and aliveness and life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's intimately, inextricably linked with body and mind in many ways. But it's life. I'm alive. Who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What is my identity? See, that's why to me, I opted for spiritual as opposed to spiritual formation as opposed to identity formation, because identity is the expression of being. It's the way, it's the conceptualization of being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it's our unique being.
Yes.
That's what identity is, our unique being, which is spirit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am.
And we were talking earlier about how just that word, I am, there's that scripture for anyone who has read the Bible. There's a story of Moses and you tell it, Tom.
Okay.
Because I think what it does is it trails us into some really interesting thoughts around identity, actually.
And this is fundamental to a worldview for the major Western and Eastern people of the book, where the Old Testament, for example, is a very significant part of the there's the story of Moses with God, and God wants him to go liberate his people from bondage and slavery. And Moses 3 times, I think it is, says, "So who's sending me?" So I'm going to go and I'm going to say I'm coming because somebody sent me. Can I give him a name? And the term, the name in Hebrew, Yahweh, has, because of a curious thing with the Hebrew language, isn't time oriented the way Western. We think of time as past, present, and future, but that's not really the way that is in that terminology, in that word. It's more contextual, I guess is the way I would put it. And it isn't past, present, or future. It's more flow, I guess is the kind of way I would describe it. And so that is translated I am, but it could as well, and probably, although it's clumsy to try to get at it, I have been, I am, and I will be. And because of the context, he's saying his name, which names have a lot to do with identity. And Moses was trying to get a sense of the identity of the one sending him. And it's not just I have been, I am, and I will be, but it's I am, I have been, and I will be, and that will be with you. And there is that relational context for God saying who he was.
So when Moses was asking the question, who can I tell them that has sent me?
He was asking for an identity.
In translation, the name was God who is with you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's something about that for me which points to something about identity, that something about understanding our identity, and which is such a big thing. We all know that. It's a core human purpose and desire to know who we are. But there's something about knowing who we are in our identity that involves us knowing that we're not alone.
Right. Yes. And I would say not only that we are not alone in terms of relationship with others, but that in terms of identity, we don't have to be alone even from ourselves.
Mm.
So many people feel alone because they don't have an intimate, healthy relationship with themselves.
Yeah. And we spend all the time with ourselves. So we better be happy with ourselves, right?
And content. Mm-hmm. Sometimes happy. But again, hearkening back to something I think I said in an earlier episode, contentment is usually defined as a sense of satisfaction with happiness. I don't think that's necessary. It can be a sense of satisfaction. We may or may not be happy at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But content as in satisfied, sense of well-being, yes. And when it comes to an identity and being, and this is the first step in rational intimacy, is that sense of contentment, which doesn't mean there is or isn't stress and need going on. It just doesn't trigger that tsunami of stress.
Mm.
And that contentment is a sense of, I have a sense of well-being. I am at peace with me.
Yeah.
And my body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of the questions people have, a lot of the struggles people have, a lot of the discontent that people have can be traced back to not knowing who they are.
Yes.
Or having confusion around that, or having trauma around that, or things imposed on them around that. And, we talked a lot about names and how, a name is it can be an expression of who you are. It's a part of who you are. So, I'm a mum, so that's part of who I am.
That's also a role.
Yeah, it's also a role.
Right.
So but that's not the whole thing.
No.
So talk about that.
So show up someplace, you're with a new group. Oftentimes, when it comes to introducing yourself, it's what you do. It's your job or a role or a position that you occupy. Or it can be, this is who I'm related to. This is who I have a connection with. That does not necessarily express identity.
So talk to me a little bit about, we've talked about Moses in the Bible, and we've also got this other story with Adam and Eve. I'd love you to just share that, because I think it's actually fascinating with understanding the difference between names, which can be a function of identity to some point, but then also there's something else behind those names, you know, that are more to do with our being.
Mm-hmm. So, and you just rattled it off. You said Adam and Eve.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Everybody thinks Adam and Eve. And this is the story of creation. Humans coming into existence. Everything coming into existence. And several times along the way, God says, this is good, but the word there actually means beneficial. So the way things are is beneficial. And then he creates the first human being, and Adam, which Adam we think of as a name. But Adam wasn't just a name, it described being. Because Adam is the word for earth or dirt. And you can go a little crazy with, for the first human being who was a male is dirt, but that's not really where this is going. It's this human being was of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And earth had been, all of the stuff of creation had been brought together, and then life breathed into that. And that became a living being. And it was called by God Adam, earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the story, God said, so Adam, and I'm saying it Adam rather than Adam to get away from the name thing,
mm-hmm.
and Adam as identity and being.
Mm-hmm.
God said, Adam, look around, what do you notice? And Adam looks all around and says, there's two of everything except me. And God said, that is not beneficial. It's not good that an Adam is alone. See, even that, we say it's not good that a man is alone. It's not good that an Adam is alone. He didn't say it was detrimental. Being ourselves as an individual, there's nothing detrimental about that. It's just not beneficial if there's only one. And so God created another human. And because in the story, that second human was taken out of the first one, Adam. So there was Adam and Adam. And then when Adam, which means out of, so when there was Adam and out of Adam, and both together were in the image and likeness of God, and both together are human, that when Adam became the mother of all things, Adam gave her a name, Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And Eve stuck, and Adam did not, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I remember we were talked about this just before we started recording, and you said to me, because you said to me, everyone thinks that Adam and Eve were the first couple, but there was a couple before them, and I was like thinking, oh no, where is he going to take me on this one?
To who she really was.
But actually, what you were saying was the names came later.
Yeah.
The names came later. Their being was created first, and then out of, creation, out of bearing children, Eve got that name. So I think that's really, I think that's a really helpful example when we think of ourselves and our own identity, especially to do with names, because we are given names, and they're not necessarily bad things. They can be an expression of who we are. But I think if we don't get behind them, like if we don't understand our being, or take a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, then we can end up getting lost in all of these little names that we've either given ourselves or other people have given us or imposed on us.
Yes.
So I think that's why, part of what AHA spiritual formation does is it gets into that space of being.
Does. Yes. And then we can have a sense of ourselves and be content with that, which content doesn't mean not aspirational. Content is the gateway to aspirational, to growth, to motivation, to becoming more, but still ourselves.
Yeah.
And that, again, that part doesn't change. I am who I am. Now, I am maybe really dysfunctional and conflicted and traumatized and trapped, and I can't be me, or it can be, these are things that have impacted me. Yes, And they have impacted, they have shaped. In some ways, for many people, they've defined identity. We aren't what people have done to us. We aren't our experiences. We are who we are.
Yeah,
and we can discover that with identity homeostasis, with spiritual homeostasis.
Yeah, so can we just talk a little bit, like unpack that a little bit? Because actually, we talked in our first ever episode, which feels like such a long time ago now, the tsunami of stress. And really that talks about, that pattern of stress. But then we've also talked in prior episodes about trauma, and we talked about childhood trauma, and we've really unpacked all of that and story. And actually the reality is that every human being has had some level of stress and trauma, pretty much.
Yes, because if you're alive, it's
the ecosystem.
People
that we
do
live
things.
in.
Things happen.
Yes. However, I think that there's a connection here that's really important for people to understand. In that that trauma can have an impact on identity. And so maybe so I wonder whether sometimes we focus on the trauma and stress as oh my gosh, that's so
defining.
Hard. But actually the real issue is that it's put confusion into our identity. And that's something that is very difficult to live with, because we are made to know who we are.
And can be at a level where we can't live with it.
Yeah.
And aren't living.
And so when people come to you, Tom, and go through AHA, somatic, cognitive, spiritual / identity, as they're, activating homeostasis and allowing their body, mind, spirit to deal with some of this stress and trauma, we're almost allowing people to get to this kind of core place of who they are, which if there's health there, if there's homeostasis and life there, then there's this kind of abundance, this flourishing of a human being.
Yes. Not just here we go back to the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic flight or fight, sensed or perceived threat to well-being, and we have a flight or fight response. Parasympathetic, rest, relax, recover from flight or fight, recover from change, and digest, kind of important to surviving. But the third part, the enteric nervous system, that's why I describe that part of our brain that isn't in our skull. It's down in our gut. And if you want to know more about that, listen to that episode on the enteric nervous system. But the enteric nervous system and homeostasis, that's the part of the brain, the glial cells and neurons that are in our gut from about the bottom third of the esophagus down all the way to where everything exits the body. And that part of the brain, the enteric nervous system, is why I describe it as survive and thrive. And with chronic stress and trauma, unrelieved, unnormalized, not restored to homeostasis, it can be just survive.
And so people are surviving physically, skin of their teeth. They are just surviving. So that's where they'll get all of those, physical sensations or just they can't sleep. There's insomnia. There's
maladies,
heart palpitations, or whatever it is.
All sorts of things.
So they're surviving in that way. They're surviving in their perceptions.
Hoping to.
Hoping to survive.
Their mind is driving them mad.
And so they're kind of being just surviving, all of the things that they know deep down aren't quite right, like perfectionism, or I need to control the situation.
People pleasing, or control, or criticism, or...
But they're just surviving
avoidance.
It. They just manage to not blow everything up, possibly. And then also in the spiritual or identity space, people are surviving there too. Just kind of maybe by getting by with a few things that validate them, a name or a role or a
clinging on to those
or
identity,
or like possessions or positions. So that's what gives people
identity,
a sense of identity,
right? But it's just surviving.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about here is this pivot to thriving.
Yes, and that's homeostasis at a being, identity, spiritual level. And I want to be really clear, when I say spiritual, I'm not talking religious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about being and identity. Oftentimes those things get connected to and are expressed in.
Mm-hmm. What
we're really talking about fundamentally with identity is intimacy.
Mm.
Our intimacy in a healthy way with ourselves, healthy intimacy in community with others, individuals, groups. But it's about identity and intimacy are inextricably linked with being. I am in relationship with.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It goes all the way back to that story with Moses when he was asked the name of God, when he was like saying, well, who shall I say you are, God? I think it's really important that we don't miss this with. Mm-hmm. Like God is past, present, future mm-hmm. with us.
Yes.
And so I think when it comes to identity and understanding our identity, when we're thriving in it, it is that with
mm-hmm.
piece too.
Yes.
Intimacy.
And with ourselves, with mm-hmm. others, with God, mm-hmm. with the transcendent. Mm-hmm. And then our own lives can become more transcendent mm-hmm. than just this. And it's more than just what I'm experiencing. It's more than just the roles I have. It's more than just the status I have. It's more than the things I possess. It's intimacy with ourselves, and that gets expressed as our story.
And what's fascinating, I think, is when you get to that level mm-hmm. and you start there, then actually I think, well, in my experience, I think what you can find is that all of the other things, the expressions of mm-hmm. identity, actually open up a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you can...
Those are opportunities, not the restrictions.
Yeah, I was saying to you...
The limitations.
I was saying to you earlier about, you know, as I was driving here today, I was thinking and just about where I'm at in... you know, my own life, and you know, I'm 46, and I was saying to you that the only way I can describe it is that I don't know why it's taken me so long, but now finally I feel like I get to be the whole version of who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm not there yet, but I feel like this expanse in terms of some of those expressions of mm-hmm. my identity that wasn't there before Autonomic Healing. It was, I think I was probably operating, you know, pigeonholing myself. Maybe other people had done the same thing to me, operating in, you know, some level of Ruth, but mm-hmm. not the whole of me. And so that feeling is just incredibly life-giving and freeing. Just yes. Even, now I don't get, like, it's not all perfect at all, but it's...
If you were to say so, then we would be having a different conversation. I know. And I would be saying, how did you achieve that?
I know. But I just want to share that because it sounds like it could be perfect, but it isn't perfect. But it's also, I think, how it's meant to be. Mm-hmm. You know, to be able to have this breadth of who you are, mm-hmm. not to be boxed in by... you know, identity via a community or identity via a role or identity via, you know, all of those things can be good and healthy.
And are part of, and we do exist, yeah. But defined by and mm-hmm. defining why. Mm-hmm. And no, thriving is what this is about. And homeostasis allows life. Homeostasis is life. And then we can thrive and discover ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is so key because so many people, this is what people are searching for, is the freedom to be who they are, the understanding to be who they are.
Yes.
I mean, that in some ways is life's discovery for each of us.
Yes.
And one thing that I wanted to share with you as well was, it's just it's not silly, but it's a little example of change for me. And I've just noticed that after going through AHA, somatic, cognitive and spiritual, but maybe particularly more spiritual, I've just noticed there's been this embracing of new things for me. Obviously in space of Korea, I've been in a really new season, but also just in some of the just gifts and abilities that I've never seen myself. Yeah, interest. So one thing that I've started doing recently, and I've never ever put myself down as a creative person, although I am incredibly creative, but I just wouldn't see myself as an artist, But one thing I've been doing recently is writing poetry.
Yes, and this, by the way, dear listeners, when she said silly, we are not even remotely in that category, as we're going to share with you in just a moment. This is not silly.
That was my little my seemingly rational perception sneaking out there by me saying silly.
Brilliant. Oh. If I may borrow the British term for a moment.
You're very welcome. But I'm going to share. I wrote a poem yesterday, and I was just telling you that it's become this really life-giving space for me. Yeah. I do a lot of things. I've got fingers in all sorts of different pies, and a lot of the stuff that I do, I produce a lot. I'm producing, whether it's studying and producing a coursework or producing this podcast or whatever. And I have love in producing, but this particular space of writing poetry hasn't got a sense of producing around it. It's
creating.
It's something that's for me and
expressing.
Yes, and it feels like I think the reason why I love the space is that I feel very alive when I'm writing. It's like the most alive I think I feel. So it's just been really recent. I think it's been within this year that I just started writing, and this
if I remember right, months.
Yeah, this is probably, I don't know, maybe my 5th or 6th poem that I've written. So I wrote this yesterday. But I just wanted to, and I'll share it in a minute, but I just wanted to share it with the listeners because I think it's an example of, oh my gosh, I would never have thought I would have done that.
No.
And yet I wonder whether this was always part of who I was, but because of stress and trauma, it was just not, it was, excluded from who Ruth was in that season of my life. But now with embracing healing and embracing thriving in my being, it's kind of opening some of this stuff up for me. So
yes. And identity gets expressed in story.
Yes.
And story is a description of being in motion, if I can put it that way. It's being, but being in motion, vital. Yes.
And just a little context as well. I actually wrote this. I'm involved with an organisation called the Women's Speakers Collective. And in January, they are having it's something they call a Story Strong boot camp. It's in Vancouver, January 24th to 25th or something like that. But and the whole reason is for women who have difficult stories to come along and learn how to share their story and claim their story. And that can be all sorts of different traumas there that they'll come with. And so I was kind of thinking about this and just praying really for the women who would go there. And so I just decided to write a poem. And it's, and I think that so I've called it Story Strong. So shall I share it?
Please. And if you don't, I will.
Okay. Well, you can share it if you want to.
Which would you prefer?
I don't mind. What do you want to do?
No.
I'll share it.
Good.
Okay, story strong. Feel deeply, I might drown, inhaling waters of what might kill me. I sink, heavy weighted with my story. Take breath, girl, breathe. Rumours of goodness buoy me. Soldiers march in the wrong direction, missing battles that need a fight. Relational weapons of mass destruction continue their chaotic plight. Steady, girl, speak, help others in their nights. Fragments strobe in unsettled sleep. The daytime illusion is wrong. Intimacy is holiness. Hope comes by emboldening. Take courage, girl, believe, enter into story strong.
And brilliant, awesome.
Thank you.
Goosebumps. We can be. And we can be affirming of identity. We can be. And we can be affirming of identity and discover, who am I? And be able to say and experience a sense of contentment with that. And then, yes, the stresses and needs of life are always there, but it doesn't have to be just surviving. There can be homeostasis. And with homeostasis, it's not just surviving, there's thriving. And then our story is one of thriving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a story strong.
Mm-hmm.
One that thrives.
Yep.
And it's not about our circumstances. It's not about any of that stuff, but it's about a sense of knowing who we are and embracing that in all the fullness that brings.
Yes, I am. Past, present, future. I am, and I am with. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.